Well, delegates are starting to arrive in Winnipeg as tomorrow will mark the beginning of the NDP's national convention. And this is no ordinary gathering, as the convention will also announce the next leader of the federal party. For nearly 2.5 weeks, party members have been casting their ballots. And as you have seen here on CPAC, there are 5 people running for the job. But whoever is announced as the next leader of the federal NDP, they will have a big job ahead of them. Take a look at these numbers compiled by Eric Grenier at the RIT. In 2025, only 39% of past NDP voters actually voted for their traditional party, with most voters casting their ballot for the Liberals. Recent polling from the Angus Reid Institute this week, we should also note, says the situation is not that much better 11 months after the last campaign. And with that, let's bring in our political strategist this week. Marci Surkes is the Managing Director and Chief Strategy Officer at the Compass Rose Group, also a Liberal strategist. Cole Hogan is a Conservative strategist, and George Soule is a former Director of Communications for the NDP. He is the founder and principal with On Step Strategies, joining us from Winnipeg today. And for full transparency, we should also point out that George is very much involved in the Heather McPherson campaign to be the next NDP leader. So hello to all 3 of you.
Hi, Michael.
So listen, I'm going to pick up with the Angus Reid Institute poll that did come out this week, because Angus Reid essentially went out and spoke to Canadians who have voted for the NDP in the last 4 elections. And their results tell them that only half of these NDP voters are willing to consider the party in any future election, whenever that may be, which makes me wonder, whoever, again, wins the leadership this weekend, what type of challenge are they going to face in terms of trying to revive this party, Marci?
This is not good news for the New Democrats, and this has been a year of bad news. I mean, look at what happened in the general election. We ended up in a highly presidentialized election where the NDP was a non-factor, if we're being honest, in terms of the results. So the new leader is going to be coming from way behind, historic lows for the New Democrats. They are going to have to rebuild really from the ground up. Now, I say this as somebody who has also been with their party when we have ridden the elevator down to the basement. So I understand what this feels like, but there is no quick turnaround here. This is rebuild fresh from scratch. This has to be vision, implementation. The leader is going to have to be infused with charisma, and they have to be ready to roll up their sleeves for the long haul. This is not going to be a 6-month turnaround. The New Democrats' best hope, I think, is that Mr. Carney gets the majority and that they actually have 3 years to reset themselves.
Cole, what do you say about the challenge?
Well, I think the challenge, too, is sort of settling the differences between the provincial versions of the NDP and the federal NDP, because I think a lot of the provincial NDP leaders have decided that the federal NDP is a political liability for them, particularly in BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and that's where we see sort of the conflict. I think, you know, David Eby is probably on his last legs as premier. There's a lot of excitement around the BC Conservative leadership race. In the spirit of full transparency, I'm helping out on Caroline Elliott's campaign.
I was going to jump in. Yes.
Happy to disclose. And I think there's a lot of energy and momentum behind her campaign to defeat the NDP and become the next premier of British Columbia. In Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're nowhere near forming government. The Saskatchewan party in Saskatchewan has been in power longer than Tommy Douglas was. And in Alberta, we see Naheed Nenshi and the Alberta NDP kind of fabricating scandals because they haven't got a handle on how to become an effective opposition. So can the federal NDP, regardless of who's leader after this weekend, have the same sort of success and momentum they've had on the provincial level? It remains to be seen, but I'm rooting for them.
Okay, because a healthy federal NDP helps the Conservatives. So here, George, I'll bring you in. You know, again, you're involved in a leadership campaign right now, and whether it's Heather or someone else who wins the weekend, this is a huge challenge. If ARI is telling us that, you know, only half of past NDP voters are willing to consider the party right now.
Well, I really want to thank you for bringing me to such a happy moment where my colleagues are celebrating our party. No, look, I think there's no doubt that there's a lot of work ahead of us, right? And I think that, you know, a few things. I think there's enough to be said about the federal party that I'm not sure that Cole had to stretch the truth on what's going on provincially. You know, but to the original point that he made before he went the other way, like, we are government in British Columbia, in Manitoba, we're the official opposition in the Yukon, in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Ontario, and in Nova Scotia. Like, the NDP, there are values, and New Democrat voters are voting for our party, and we're winning, and it's coming out well. You know, Saskatchewan is a few votes short. You know, Scott Moe is no Brad Wall, and I think that what Carla Beck putting together there can mean a lot for the next win. And in Alberta, Danielle Smith is doing a lot of creating her own scandals. None need to be made up. So I think that that the next leader needs to take that success and actually figure out how to build on it. And I think to that point, I think Cole was correct, and I think that is what's going to happen. And I think that to that point, New Democrats aren't necessarily, aren't good news for Conservatives in every riding across this country, and we're not good news for Liberals everywhere either. So I understand why people want to be happy about us struggling right now, but as Marci said, there was a time when, after 2011, when we weren't sure if the Liberals were going to be able to bounce back. They certainly did. On the other end of Justin Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, people were writing the obituaries for the Liberal Party of Canada, and we've certainly seen that turned around pretty quickly. I am actually old enough to remember when there were only two progressive Conservatives in the House of Commons as well. So these things do swing and flow, and I'm not pretending it's going to be easy, but I think that if our delegates and our members make the right choice and choose a leader that really wants to build, and again, I'm working for Heather McPherson's campaign, but she understands what worked in the West, and if we can build on that success that we've seen provincially, I think that there is an opportunity, but there's no doubt that it's not overnight, and it is going to take a lot of work. And I think as long as Donald Trump is out there scaring people, and Pierre Poilievre is still scary to a lot of Canadians, I think that is a challenge that New Democrats are going to have to work really hard on. But I do think that it's something that we can overcome, and this will just be the first step in that direction.
George, let me jump in though, because when Cole mentions the provincial wings of the NDP party, and they're separate, but still the brand is an NDP brand. You have in this convention, Carla Beck is not going to show up there from Saskatchewan. Nahid Nenshi from Alberta is not going to show up there. David Eby is not going to show up there. In fact, you do have this divide between the provincial NDP and the federal NDP. How can you rebuild if there's still such alienation, so much so that Nahid Nenshi is talking about breaking away from the federal party because he thinks it's a drag on the provincial party?
Well, and again, that's something that's been around for a little while. And, Heather McPherson talks about a story when she first, and I remember in 2019, when she was running to be an MP, it took a little while for Rachel Notley to even come out and say that she was going to vote for Heather, but she was very clear that she was voting for Heather, and she didn't even talk about the bigger federal party. And Rachel is a big federal New Democrat. She's the biggest supporter of the federal party and of Heather's campaign even. So even in that extreme, it was still difficult. And so for sure the work's got to come. If I'm being honest, a lot of this has existed for a long time because of that pull of our party being sort of a rural and an urban party at the same time. And we've kind of always had a bit of that tug. And then, in 2015 and during the federal convention and our campaign, and then the 2016 convention, we had Avi Lewis, who is the other kind of front runner. It's Heather and Avi kind of in the top two here. Dropped the LEAP manifesto on the convention, which really went after the economy in the prairies. Mm-hmm. And that really turned a lot of people off. I worked right after that. I was chief of staff for 2 years in Saskatchewan with the opposition there. And then I worked for Rachel in her last year. That was a big challenge. And people don't forget that. I'm calling a lot of my friends in Saskatchewan, and they like what Heather's selling, but they're concerned about what the federal party might be if we get another leader that doesn't understand the West again. So that for sure is a challenge. But I think, again, it's something that we're going to have to work through, and what delegates are discussing this weekend.
Okay. I'm going to get back to and maybe more about how you reconcile the difference between the federal provincial. Do you see that happening? Because you talk, Cole, about learning from the western wing of the party for the NDP. Is that possible? Because there are those who believe they're very, very separate.
Yeah, there's been conversations with the Alberta NDP in terms of, now a provincial membership in the NDP in Alberta does not amount to a federal NDP membership, and they did that because they want to remove that association. And I would say,
It's actually quite.
Well,
it works. Sorry, really quickly, but yeah.
In the instance of, there's a difference between the outlook towards natural resources in Western Canada and in versions of the Alberta and Saskatchewan NDP opposed to the federal NDP. Therein lies the difference. People in the Alberta and Saskatchewan NDP know that they can't pitch Avi Lewis's version and vision for Canada not having any more natural energy resource sector to people in their provinces.
Is there any way of reconciling the two, do you think, as less a liberal, more a political strategist?
I think it's a very difficult narrative to weave, and I actually think the New Democrats may have to choose who they want to be before the next general election. And I would love to say that they could be an urban and a rural party at the same time, it may not be possible for them. They may have to choose a coalition that is more likely to win if they want to win. I mean, the question is, do they want to win, or do they want to be a voice in Parliament? And if you want to be a voice in Parliament, you can straddle and have a much broader coalition. If you want to be strategic and to win, if you're a party like the New Democrats, I think you actually have to be more discerning about who you're going after as a potential voter.
Okay, George, just to be fair to you, final 30 seconds for your thoughts on that.
I've been talking a lot on this panel, and for obvious reasons, but I will say I think that is actually true. That's the discussion: is do we want to win? Do we want to be a serious political party who takes our job of taking that voice of those who depend on us into the House of Commons seriously, or do we just want to be a lobby group who happens to occasionally run in elections? And I think that is the debate that's happening in our party, and I hope that our members will make the right choice.
Okay, well, full coverage of the NDP convention will be here at CPAC, so we're going to bug all of you at some point during this weekend. But for right now, Cole, Marci, and George, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.